Hello and welcome to this Tungsten Replicator Master Class, where in this session we will look at a simple replicator installation. My name is Chris Parker, VP of Customer Success here at Continuant. In this short course we're going to have a quick recap of the architecture and the topologies. We will look at then how to plan the installation, so the documentation, software, environmental decisions and the prerequisites, and then we're going to walk through a very simple installation. So let's recap architecture. Tungsten Replicator is an asynchronous replicator and is installed either locally on the database node or it can be installed on a host of its own. This diagram shows the basic flow of replication. The replicator can operate as either an extractor or an applier. Replication is transactionally consistent and serial, and by that I mean that we will only process a transaction for replication when the entire transaction is complete and committed to the binary logs. The replicator converts the binary log information into THL, or transaction history log, which is our own native format. Pretty much like a binary log from MySQL, but it's in a format that we have control over. This gives us the flexibility and ability to apply into our heterogeneous targets. The replicators in the applier role will then pull the THL across the network and apply this via JDBC into the target database or via a batch load method, depending upon the target in question. I will cover the alternative methods in various sessions as we go through this training. So when you're ready to install the software, what do you need? Before installing Tungsten, there are a few decisions you will need to make regarding the environment that you plan to install on. MySQL version should be determined by your application needs. However, do bear in mind that the latest bleeding edge release of MySQL may not yet be certified with every version of Tungsten. This also applies to your target database, especially if you are using a heterogeneous target. Version 8.00 of Tungsten supports all releases up to and including MySQL 8.4 and version 7. All of version 7s of Tungsten support up to and including MySQL 8.0. These may change as time goes on and as we release new patch versions, so you should always cross-check the versions supported in our documentation pages at the link shown. Are you installing against a local database or a remote database? I will talk about this more in the next slide. Monitoring and backup is essential. We have a number of built-in scripts and tools for gathering metrics that can be reflected in tools such as Zabbix, Grafana, Nagios. We also have Prometheus exporters. And creating your own scripts to capture metrics can also be easily achieved. It is critical that OS metrics such as disk space, network availability and host availability are monitored and alerted to at all times. Version 7 onwards of Tungsten also includes a fully documented REST API which can be used for feeding your monitoring systems. So local or remote. When we talk about remote, I refer to this as an off-board installation, whereby the replicator sits on its own host and the source or target database is somewhere else. Most commonly, this would apply to Cloud SQL environments such as Aurora and Google, but it may also be applicable to others depending upon the use case. From the extractor perspective, we will read the binary logs through the various MySQL calls and create relay logs locally for an off-board installation. These are then processed in the same way as if we were reading binary logs from that local instance. For appliers, it is just simply a case of having a connection to that target database to write to. There are a few variations depending on the type of target, but we cover those in more detail when we get through to that stage in the course. So what are the prerequisites? So there are a number of prerequisites required for installing Tungsten, and it's always recommended to review the full details on our documentation pages. The link is here on the screen. This will always have the most up-to-date information, especially regarding supported versions of external tools such as Ruby and Java. Some of the key ones and the essential ones: for the host, we recommend an operating system user for the installation. All of our demos and our best practices and documentation refer to the operating system user called Tungsten. You also need to make sure that your etc hosts file is up to date and has the relevant connectivity so that the hosts can talk to each other. Sudoers, there are some recommended changes to the sudoers configuration. Now, some of this is essential and some of it is optional. Documentation outlines all of this in more detail to allow you to establish what level of elevated privileges you are comfortable giving to that Tungsten operating system user. There are also requirements for Ruby and Java. Ruby is used for a lot of our command line tools, Java is the main language that the software runs in. So it's essential that those are installed using certified versions. Again, I don't list them on this page, as that may change as time goes on, depending upon when this training session was recorded and when you watch it. It may be different, so do look at our documentation for those up-to-date details. Network, there are various port requirements between the hosts. For example, between the extractor and the applier, they will need to communicate. In an off-board situation, the extractor and the appliers will also need to communicate to their source or target databases accordingly. So review those port requirements in the documentation and make sure that's in place. For your MySQL instance, there are a number of my.cnf settings which are recommended for best practice, and all of that is outlined in the documentation. And there are also user accounts within the database that you need. An elevated user, our examples use the username Tungsten, but this can be any user you wish. And that just is a user that allows the replicators to extract and apply accordingly. So the installation methods and types. Very simply, we provide the software as an RPM or a tar package. Choose whichever suits your needs best. In the demonstrations and throughout the training, I will be using the tar package. In terms of where you get that tar package from, you will need access to the download portal on continuant.com. If you are an existing user, just log in with your credentials and you will be able to download the software that is applicable to the licenses that you have. If you're watching this and you don't yet have Tungsten, then just contact us, sales@continuant.com, and we'll be happy to sort you out. Tungsten supports full SSL between all components, and from version 7 onwards, this is actually enabled by default. Using security is an advanced topic, and there are many options available to configuring it, from simply allowing the installation to do it all for you, or more advanced use of your own certificates and key stores. And we cover this in detail in the security training sessions. So for this demo, I'm going to show you how to install a simple MySQL to MySQL replication pipeline. For simplicity, the MySQL instances are located on the same host as I will install the replicators onto. My hosts are EC2 instances running in AWS, and they're running the Rocky operating system. And my databases are all MySQL version 8.0, and for simplicity, I'm going to install with SSL security options disabled. So let's start with the installation now. Okay, so on my terminal session here, on the left, I have ext1, which will be my extractor, and on the right, I have app1, which will be my applier. I'm already logged in as the Tungsten user, so as I say, these instances have all the prerequisites in place, and we're ready to go. So first of all, there is the configuration file that is essential for the software installation, and that is typically installed in etc tungsten, and it is called tungsten ini. Now this file is only used and read during the installation, and it's only read during any update that you do to the software. It's not read throughout normal runtime, so just bear in mind what's in here is only read those single points. If you need to change any of these properties and the software is already installed, then there's a process to do that, which we talk about later. So first of all, we have a default section, and this would be properties which apply to the installation in general and all services on that host. In my example here, I'm only installing one service, but if I was installing multiple services, then you would have the defaults which apply to all of those services, and then you have the service specific data. Now the extractor and the applier in terms of my defaults are the same. We have the operating system user that we're installing as, user Tungsten. We have the installation location, so we're going to install into the opt continuant directory. Profile script, so this is just to let the installation know what profile script we're using. We then put a couple of lines in there so that when you log in as that Tungsten user, the environment is loaded for you. Sets up the paths, sets up aliases, things like that. As I mentioned a moment ago, we are disabling security just for simplicity in this particular demo. We're also allowing some intensive checks on MySQL, and this is going to just check things like functions and features of MySQL that may be enabled that might cause Tungsten Replicator just to behave differently. Not that it will break it, it's just additional warnings and things that we may need to consider. Very rarely there is anything, but it's just always good to have that check. We then have the API properties, We do have a specific training session on the API, so I'm not going to cover what all of these mean now, but that's the API block. And then we have install equals true. So install equals true is telling the installation to configure the replicator with your system CTL or inet.d startup services so that if the host reboots, the replicator will automatically restart. We then have the service block. So on the extractor, we identify the primary or the master and the members. And in the case of an extractor, there is just itself. And then we have the username and password for MySQL. On the applier, we have the same. We tell it which host is the primary. So this is how we know which host to connect to. The members, the username, password for the database, and the port number that your MySQL database is running on. And that's really all we need in terms of that simple basic configuration. There are a lot more options we can add in here for filtering, auto recovery, etc. And we'll cover those as we progress through the training. But for now, we're going to use this basic installation as the foundation for the rest of our course. So that file is ready. We can close out of there. And then we have in opt continuum, which is our install path that we specified in our configuration file. At the moment, we just have a software directory, and in there we have the tar file that I've downloaded and installed. And when you download it from the Continuum website, this is where you would copy that file to. This location is what we refer to as the staging directory, and it's where you would store the tar files for any updates, future updates that you do. We're going to extract that file, which will create a new directory. And it's from here that we then start the installation. So we will simply do tools, tpm, validate. TPM is the Tungsten Package Manager. It's the way that we do all installations and updates. It's also used for various other command line options and actions as well. I talk about this in more detail in the next session, which is the command line tools session. So I'm not going to go into detail on what else you can do with TPM. Validate is basically saying, like, do a dry run. So it's not going to install the software, but it will do checks to make sure the prerequisites are in place and that we can communicate with the database. So let's just run that now. This will bring up info, warning, and errors. If it reaches an error, it will stop and it won't allow us to go any further. Warnings are just things to consider. They won't stop the installation, but they may be something you need to change. And information is just information. So to start at the top, information here, SSL certificates have been auto-generated. Now I know that we said that SSL is going to be disabled for this installation, but we still generate some certificates because we store the credentials for the API. So that's what that's referring to. The warning is just saying if you are using security, or if you want to make sure that the credentials that you're using for the API is identical across all hosts, then you just need to get all of those certificates and synchronize. Choose one host as the source and synchronize them to all of the other hosts so that all of that information matches. We cover that in more detail in the security training sessions. I then have a few warnings here about a few suggestions for MySQL, increasing open file limits, setting no file. I don't need to worry about them. This is just a demo. I'm not going to be putting these replicators under massive amounts of load or opening lots of connections to the database, so I don't need to worry about that. But if this pops up and you're installing this in a production system that you intend to be quite a busy system, then it is always worth just paying attention to this, checking these things out, make sure things are set correctly, just so that you don't end up exhausting the resources for MySQL. So these are just sort of best practice warnings. But otherwise, the command successfully completed, therefore we know that we can do the installation. So what we're going to do now is run the same command again, but issue install this time instead. And that will install the software for us. Those same infos and warnings will pop up that we had from the validate, and then we will have the installation complete, and we will see this the next message. Okay, and there we go. Both of them are finished. We have some next steps. So this is how to start the software. And then we have environment variables that have been added into the bash profile that we specified in that profile script setting. And then we say how to check that everything is working. So first of all, let me just show you the bash profile. And you can see this is the line we've added, so that every time I log in as a Tungsten user, this file is going to be called, which will set that environment for us. I like to be lazy. I just literally exit and log back in again to load it. When I've done an installation, you can manually source that file if you wish, as per the example there in the output. In terms of, before I start the software, let's have a look at what we've actually installed. So in opt continuant, we will have a number of directories. The backups directory, this is the default location for any backups that you may initiate using the replicator tools. You can change that location. This is just the default. And of course, you can do backups outside of the replicator. You don't need to use our tools, but we provide some tools that make it easier, and that's where they would go. Metadata is, as the name suggests, metadata. You will very rarely see anything in there. It's not really of use unless you're doing some more advanced checks and validation work inside the database. Relay, this is where the binary logs will go in offboard installations when we're downloading the binary logs locally to extract into THL. Releases, this is where the installation goes. So in releases, you will see one directory at the moment, the Tungsten Replicator directory. If I was to install 801, I would have a directory for 801, install 802, 802, etc. And all those directories will be kept. They are automatically cleaned up. We automatically clean it up based on a retention that you can configure, or you can manually clean them up with various command line tools. But ultimately, this is where the software that is running will be installed. We then have the service logs directory, which is the log files for the replicator. The share directory, in here we have the env.sh file that we looked at previously. We will also have the various security certificates, etc. get stored in that directory. There's other uses for it, but generally they're the more advanced features. Software is that staging directory where we downloaded the tar package to, and we extracted that prior to installation. THL is the location for THL log files. And again, this is configurable. You can change this location to somewhere else if you wish, but by default, this is where those files go. And then we have Tungsten, which is a symlink to the releases directory for the release that we are currently running. What happens when we do an update or an install? So if we were to update now to say version 801, we would extract it. The software installation would create opt continuant releases Tungsten Replicator 8.0.1. It would build everything in there, all the metadata scripts, create everything, get everything ready. And then at the last minute, it will just switch the symlink to point to that new releases directory. That way you can do an installation. The bulk of the heavy lifting of the installation can be done without touching the replicator, and then momentarily switch the symlink, restart the software, and you're running on that new version. In terms of MySQL, I'm just going to log in as my Tungsten user. We have a database that we create. It's not there yet because we haven't started the replicators up. But when we start the replicators up, we will have a database in there called tungsten _ and then the service name. And that's our metadata schema, our tracking schema. We'll only have 5 tables in there. One which tracks the latest committed sequence number, extracted or applied. We have a heartbeat table which tracks the heartbeat that we initiate between the replicators. And then there are some other tables for metadata regarding parallel apply if you've enabled parallel apply in your replicator. So what I'm now going to do is I'm just going to drop out of here. I'm going to start the replicator up using start all. And then we'll go back into the database and I'll show you that tracking schema that's been created. And we can now see Tungsten Alpha is there, and that's the replicator getting it started. So let's check that replication is working. So I'm just going to go here on the primary, and I'm just going to create a database. Let's create database HR, this demo schema that I always use. And let's create a table in there. Oops, use HR first. And let's put some data in it. Just grab some SQL, insert a couple of rows in there. Okay, if we now go on to the target, we can do show databases again. You can see that HR database is there. Use HR, we can do show tables. We can see those tables are there. Select star from regions, and we can see that data is there. So we know replication is working. So that's great. We know that we're up and running. In terms of the command line, we can use the trepctl command. We can say services, and this will just show us the service that is running. It's called Alpha, and we either have the role of slave or master or extractor and applier, and we have the state is online. This is just a very small status output, but it's enough for us to see that we are running and we're online. In the next training session, where we look at the command line tools, I will go into detail with TUEPCTL and all of the other options that you can issue and see, check the status of your replicators running. And we'll cover that in that next training session. But for now, we have a fully functional replicator extracting from MySQL and applying into MySQL. So that was the installation complete, and that's this training session complete. What we've learned is we've reviewed the architecture, we looked at the various prerequisites, the decisions to make when you come to do an installation, and then we looked at a very simple installation, basic MySQL to MySQL, no bells, no whistles, just basic replication. What we will now do is we'll use those two instances that I set up just now. We'll use those throughout the rest of the training session and show how you can build on that, improve on it, add filtering, add some of the more advanced features. But for now, I hope you found this session useful. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. Take care. Goodbye.